Okay. Yeah, so in terms of introducing our panel in a little bit more detail, so Jana Christopher, she's actually an image integrity analyst at EMBO Press and established that program. She actually joined FEBS Press in 2017 and is the image data integrity analyst for their 4 journals. She actually has a background in theater arts. She has a master's in bilingual translation from Westminster University. So she brings a very interesting background to this panel. Boris Barbour, as many of you know, with Brandon Stell and a couple of colleagues, was foundational in the establishment of PubPeer. For those of you that are lucky enough to hear the talk this morning, Elisabeth Bik, who spoke yesterday, originally worked for Biome, which has been in the news recently, and then essentially quit her job to take up private consultancy on image integrity analysis. And then Erika Boxheimer, she is a data integrity analyst at EMBO in Heidelberg in Germany. Before then, she was an editorial assistant and a freelance contractor. She worked for a time for the American Library Association. And again, comes from we have a good diverse background here. She actually has a BA in history and political science from Northeastern University in Chicago. In terms of myself, I have like 3 slides, and I can do slide share. That's me. I'm Paul Brookes. That's my lab website. I'm on Twitter. What do I do for a day job? This is my day job. I kill mice. We take mice hearts and we give them heart attacks and perfuse them and grind them up and do metabolomics. This is a mouse heart. It's beating 600 times a minute with a little balloon in there to measure its ventricular function. That's my bread and butter. That's what pays the bills. Back around a decade ago, I started discovering these types of problems in papers of a particular scientific competitor of mine. And then discovered problems in a grant that he had submitted to the AHA. This all got reported to the ORI. And then in 2012, I was fairly heavily involved with uncovering the case of Bharat Agarwal and a lot of the research misconduct associated with curcumin and dietary supplements at MD Anderson. This was blogged via a Japanese blogger. One of the very first sort of whistleblowers in the area was this Japanese guy, Juichi Jugan. I started a science fraud blog in 2012. We wrote about 275 papers. 6 authors then came along and decided to threaten me with lawsuits. And being a faculty member at a private university, I didn't really want to upset my chair. So I basically shut down the website, closed the site, lawyered up, got my lawyer to write desist letters to people, and the thing went away. I'd basically been doing this ever since then, just in a more public way, rather than anonymously, posting things on PubPeer and on my lab website nowadays. The upshot of the blog actually was something that was referred to earlier by Richard in his talk. At the same time that we had a whole bunch of papers that were written about, there were a whole bunch of other papers for which they'd been reported to the journals, but they hadn't been discussed in public. And at the time, there was about a 7-fold greater rate of action by the ones that had been shouted about in public, albeit with very sweary language. Anybody that knows me knows I'm British and I have a bit of a potty mouth, so to speak. Updating that data since then, actually, that lead is still there in the intervening 6 or 7 years. And this sort of fits a little bit with the kind of rates that Elisabeth was talking about yesterday. So, even in the set of papers that was loudly blogged about and is fairly well known to a lot of people, 2/3 of those papers are still have 0 action taken against them. We're doing a lot of stuff just through PubPeer recently. One of the recent cases is this case. This is involving Mario Sad, who is a researcher from Brazil. He actually just lost last week a bid to become the rector of the university in Brazil. These are a series of Western blots which you can basically align, and it's the blot that keeps on giving. It's essentially the same image used in 15 separate papers. And rather like Elisabeth was talking about yesterday, this is all essentially being done manually, relying on eyeballs rather than algorithms. And so what I will do now is sort of ask each of the panelists to talk about what they do, what their role is. If you have slides, please share them. And then we'll go into a few questions. If you have questions, please post them in the chat window as we're going. And we have some other questions that the panelists have already seen. So maybe in my Zoom window, I see Erica next. So maybe, do you want to go first?
Sure. All right. Can you see my screen? Great. Okay, so my name is Erica Boxheimer, and as Paul was saying, I am a data integrity analyst for EMBO Press. My primary role is to check the figures in 4 of the 5 scientific journals that we publish, and this is primarily done pre-publication. In addition, I also keep track of the whistleblower complaints and ethics issues that come to the journal's attention. For the most part, we focus on pre-publication screenings to catch figure issues, and this is using the ORI droplets in Photoshop, comparing the figures to each other manually within the same paper, and it takes 40 to 50 minutes per paper, so we're probably not catching everything, but we do catch a lot of things. And we do this so that we can correct the papers before they are published and keeping the bad science out of the public record. We are, of course, also alerted to issues post-publication, and we are alerted by by authors, institutes, readers, and whistleblowers. We are subscribed to the PubPeer dashboard, and I receive email notifications extremely frequently. We prioritize the papers that we are going to investigate at the moment based on the type of issue and how old the paper is. And right now I have roughly 15 open investigations, and on PubPeer we have, I think it was around 220 articles that have comments, and 35 or 40 of them have been resolved. So it's an ongoing process. And the problem is that when we close one case, another one is immediately opened. So I feel like we're never catching up. When we do find an issue pre and post publication, we follow a standardized process. So first, screening the figures to check for duplications, for splices, for graphs that appear similar. And then these findings are triaged with the scientific editor. Having a background in history, I can't tell you what the implications are for a blot being reused in a specific case. Maybe it is okay, maybe it isn't okay. If it's something like a reused blot and the experiment setup is the same, then we can ask the authors for source data and to edit into the figure legend why they reused this control, or for example. Other issues are more serious, and those we have to go further. So we contact the authors asking in neutral language for source data, saying that we've noted a potential aberration in the figure set and asking for, in general, for the figure level source data, not specifying which panel exactly. Sometimes we have to specify which type of data depending on how busy the figure is. And once we get the source data, we evaluate it with the scientific editor and triage again. And depending on if we can deconstruct what happened, if they've cut out 2 lanes that were empty from the source data, it's easy enough to see why they put the 2 lanes together, and we can ask them to fix the figure and move on. Other times it's less simple. We've had cases where we've received manipulated source data, for example, and these kinds of cases trigger an institutional investigation. And we typically tell the authors that we're going to contact the institute and ask for a name of the correct person to contact. If they aren't responsive or don't give us a name, then we go to the dean of the institute or the highest level up of the college to report that we have this potential issue. So I believe that is it from me, and I will hand it off to the next person. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, next on my screen is Jana. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay. Is that working? Yeah, okay, fine, cool. So first up, thanks so much for having me at this fantastic conference. I've really enjoyed myself and it's been super interesting. So thanks for the introduction. I'm just repeating what has been said. So I work as an image data integrity analyst for FEBS Press. I used to work for EMBO actually, and then I left and started my own business, and that's been going quite well, but I'm you know, it's good to be with the society, and FEBS has been really good to me, and it's been extremely interesting working for them because you know, they're lower impact factor journals, and the issues that I come across are definitely different, and there's a lot of it. Oh. Here we go. So just like Erica was saying, I do mainly pre-publication screening, and you know, the findings that come up may result in correction or in the reversal of the decision to publish, and this happens rather often actually. So at FEBS Press overall, the 4 journals, it's close to 4% of the manuscripts that I screen that end up not getting published, so it's really, really high. And then on top of that, I do we do investigations from FEBS, following up allegations that are brought to us, and of course PubPeer is one of the you know, like they do at EMBO, and most journals probably do. We're signed up to this alerts that I get an email whenever there's an issue posted. And in actual fact, Elisabeth, you'd be pleased to see that this paper that you flagged to us is being retracted this week. Hopefully, it's taking a little bit longer than it should, but yeah, we've sent the text off to Wiley, so it shouldn't take much longer now. I also have been working on paper mills quite intensively for the last couple of years. So there was the tadpole paper mill that I encountered at the FEBS publications, and that was a real shocker because I'd never seen anything like that before. So I was really, you know, I couldn't really quite believe it, and I had to talk to a lot of people and check back with them, but you know, it turned out that it was what I thought it was. And I also published with Jennifer Byrne, who you've all seen and heard of, obviously, and then that was a really nice experience, and this piece has done really well. So that was great for me, and it was also great for FEBS. And yeah, so it was really nice to see Richard's piece coming out just in time for this conference, and it feels really nice to be in the company of so many people that are working towards the same goal. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. I also do investigations for other journals. So one of the things, and Jenny also worked on this as well, these were from the Royal Society of Chemistry. They started a big investigation of 90 published papers altogether, suspecting that they came from paper mills, and I screened all of them and you know, forwarded my my findings to them, and they are now retracting 68 of those. So that was a really big event. Basically, you know, I always feel I shouldn't be saying a big success, because it's not a success. It's not something to be happy about, but it's good that they're being retracted. So that's really nice. And it was good because so Jennifer came on board because there were some papers that I felt, you know, I didn't have enough evidence. I could tell that they were, you know, the blots didn't look genuine, but I just, you know, maybe there wasn't any source data, and I couldn't, you know, I couldn't put my finger on it. And then it was good that somebody was there to, you know, she was checking the nucleotide sequences and finding other faults, and it was really nice to be backed up. And I think this way, you know, there was quite a good all-round check of these. So I guess the big difference between what I do and what sort of happens post-publication is that I, you know, and Erica as well, obviously, we see, you know, the sort of high quality figure files, and we also get to see the raw data whenever there's doubt. And that makes the job really very different. I work in Photoshop, and I'll just sort of show you a little bit of the process that I go through. So this is just an example. I've obviously taken the labels off, so you know it's just ABC. So this was the figure in the manuscript that we received at FEBS, the FEBS journal. And it was nice because there was all this raw data they had submitted alongside their figures, and it looked, you know, looked pretty good, and there was, you know, molecular weight markers on there, and everything was pretty you know, reassuring, and as you would expect. But then I was looking, you know, routinely at the individual blot panels, and I could just see there was, so this is sort of what I make it look like with in Photoshop, so that you can see the morphological features a bit more clearly, and you can, you know, see the background to the blots. And I could tell that there was just a funny sort of straight line here and there. I wasn't so sure. And so because the raw data was already, you know, had been supplied already, I thought, okay, great, I'll just go and check that. And so this is what it looked like. And then this is the solarized or the processed version that I make for myself so that I can see things better. And I don't know whether you can see it, Elisabeth, but then I noticed that there were two sections from outside. So that this box is obviously the figure panel, and then the authors had moved bits into this panel. And you know, when you look at it like that, you just can't see it, and it's sometimes really important to go into the depths of it and you know, take the time to look properly. And you can see that down here there's a cut. So basically this section sort of carries on probably, and they've just put it in here, and they cleverly did that because there's this line here, and they just sort of tried to replicate that. And there was, maybe there was a band here, it's not clear, I have no idea, but you know, when you see a duplication like that, obviously something isn't right. The thing about raw data is that I feel that we need to maybe specify a bit more clearly what is actually acceptable as raw data. And I don't know, when I was still working at EMBO, I wasn't so aware of this, and I've learned this over the years. So, you know, obviously I don't have a science background, and I didn't realize, but other people were looking out for me at the time. And what I do receive a lot these days is raw data that looks like this. So it's in, you know, it's a PowerPoint file, and it's little sections that are more or less the figure panel size, and there's labeling on the outside. There's no molecular weight markers, nothing. It just, that is nothing. It doesn't actually, you know, mean anything. Even though it's reassuringly tidy, but tidy is obviously not what we're looking for. A lot of the time when there is no raw data, you will be offered alternative facts, so to speak, alternative images, and then all of a sudden there is raw data for those. So, you know, that is always really tricky, and I'm glad that I'm not the editor who has to make that call. But that's a problem. And of course, what we need to remember is that raw data is subject to manipulation and fabrication just as much as the figures are themselves. So this is just one of the corpus that I receive on a regular basis. This is supposed to be raw data, and this is it. That there was nothing, you know, nothing more. And when I processed it, you can see that there's just huge amounts of repetition in the background. So, you know, something's not right. And of course, these bands look completely stitched in, and these two bands even overlap, which apparently is not a good thing, or not even possible. I do have to ask the scientists a lot of the time whether, you know, am I going mad, or is this something that can't possibly happen? And yeah, we have a game going at the editorial office. It's very funny. This is another case that I'd like you to see. So this was raw data for a manuscript for Knox 2 in one figure. And I was just wondering whether this was, I wouldn't think that everything about this is synthetic. I don't know how it works, and I don't know enough about what is possible when we're talking about deep faking Western blots. But what happened was we had asked for the whole set of raw data for one figure, and then they didn't send all of it. So then we wrote back to them and said, okay, thanks, but we need all of it. And then they sent the whole set, the complete set. And what was weird was that there was now a different blot for exactly that same figure. And you can see that when I, there were a couple of dots that you know, appeared that hadn't been there before. And what was weird, obviously, was that there were more bands. And that just didn't make any sense at all. And I don't know what they did, and I don't know which one is the first one, or, you know, what's happening. What's interesting is that the bands that were in the figure panel are these. So it didn't really make any sense, you know, to have these extra ones. And my uneducated guess is that it is possible that this was, you know, reused for somewhere else, maybe for a different manuscript. I really don't know. But I did an overlay of the two images just to see whether they actually are completely identical, and they are. And you can see, so this is just each of them pasted into a different color channel and then overlaid in Photoshop. And then what you get, everything that turns black or yellow is identical, and everything that's still red or green, you know, is unique. And you can see that these bands here are just sort of, you know, they're just extra. And just a small comment on the edge here. This is all very, very strange looking. This, to me, this looks very much like there was a clone tool involved, because you get these sort of fading out shapes that don't look good. So there were many issues with this manuscript, so we didn't publish it, thank God. But this was, again, you know, not my decision. I just flag up what I see, and then it goes to the editors. And this is something that I encountered recently, where I think something went wrong. The authors didn't mean to send me this file. What happened was, I mean, normally you can merge your layers in Photoshop and then everything is one, and then you can't take it apart anymore. But in this case, it was very interesting. So the bands are on one layer and the background is on another layer. So you can just turn off one of the layers and then you just have empty background. I mean, that's fantastic, right? So this is really, if you're trying to balance quantity and quality, if you're a paper mill, then this is how you do it, because basically you can just create as many blots as you like. And I found that so interesting to see. Yeah, it's not good news, but and normally the layers are merged and you can't do what I just did with that. So really, that's more or less what I've got to show you for the moment. My wish list, because we were asked to make a wish list. So raw data, really, you know, it would be very nice if there were universal, like international standards regarding raw data, what they should look like, what it should look like, and you know, when it comes to computational help, I mean, I do have Photoshop, and I think it's really good to work in Photoshop, because I think that a lot of the perpetrators work in Photoshop, and I know what's possible, and I can anticipate a lot of things that way. So that is really useful. But it would be great to be a bit faster sometimes, you know, to have a tool that finds duplications. Even if it was just duplications would really help, but it would be nice, of course, if it could also flag up manipulations. If it could check across the published literature and compare what I've got and what's already out there. And then I was wondering whether it was possible at some point to have a system that can check about across, you know, Scholar One or whatever submission system your journal's using, and check the unpublished, the rejected manuscripts. And if you're a family of journals like FEBS are, or, you know, at EMBO, you have 4 or 5 journals, if it could check across the whole family of journals, it's just an idea. I don't know whether that's even technically possible, but it would make a lot of sense, especially with the paper mills, you know, because you often receive several manuscripts from the same mill, sort of within a few weeks, because they do these onslaughts, and it could really help. And with the stock images that are being reused again and again, this will be a fantastic resource. Really be great. Oh, and yes, I have just encountered another paper. There was another paper mill at FEBS just this week. And it's really interesting. 5 different manuscripts or 6 different manuscripts come from the same computer, are submitted from the same computer. One of them had tadpole bands, which is really strange. The others didn't. So I don't know whether they're sharing their figures around amongst them, each other. I really have no idea, but this is my next thing. Okay, I'll stop sharing and pass it on to the next person.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. That's mind-blowing. Elisabeth, maybe do you want to say a few words, and then we'll get Boris to talk a bit, and then we'll sort of go into some questions. You're muted.
There we go. That's better. Too many screens here. All right, can you see my screen? Awesome. So I presented already yesterday, so I'll try to keep this pretty short. I am on Twitter, Microbiome Digest. I have my email address here, and I have a blog, scienceintegritydigest.com. And I'm sort of, you know, also an image duplication spotter. I'm building basically upon Paul Brookes' work and Claire Francis. Trying to, you know, learn a lot from the things they already had to learn. And so I did this study in which I scanned 20,000 papers and found about 800 of those to contain duplicated images. And since I've reported these around 2014, 2015, some in 2016, I have a good data set to know what happens to these papers. And this is a figure I showed yesterday as well, but I want to bring it up here again because it shows, if you go to the left column, all the 782 papers that I reported that came out of that study. All of those had internal duplications, so duplications within photos within that paper. So those 782, 5-6 years later, 60% of those papers has not been acted upon. So that's the bar in blue. And if you then, there's a couple that were retracted, a couple that were corrected. The corrected ones are in yellow and the retracted ones in red. And as I showed yesterday, I sort of make a distinction of the duplications into different categories. Sort of was some chat discussion that not all duplications and not all allegations obviously are misconduct. So I'm breaking it down into 3 different categories, in which category 1 is a simple duplications, which that could just be an error where somebody just inserted the same image twice, could also be misconduct, obviously, but you would expect that those papers would usually get away with a correction. But still, even though those are very simple things, they're not really being corrected faster or slower than the whole set. And category 3 are the images that have internal duplications. So those are the most likely to have been photoshopped. They have, for example, the same cell visible twice or the same Western blot bands within the same photo. Those are very likely to have been done intentionally. And you do see that more papers from that group on the far right bar are retracted. So, but unfortunately, also most of those are not touched, or most of those are blue. So many of those, what appear to be photoshopped, those papers are actually the one that have the least chance to be acted upon. So basically, after 5-6 years after reporting all these papers, I am frustrated with the lack of response, that 60% of these papers are still out there uncorrected. And not all of these are misconduct, obviously, but even a correction did not take place in all of these cases. So I have been taking things to social media. I regularly and more with more courage, I tried to post on social media, which was, very scary in the beginning, because you basically make yourself very vulnerable. If I make a mistake, that would cost my career. And so I'm calling out basically journals. I try not to focus too much on the papers, but I've called out, Nature and Science, and a very famous French microbiologist who became sort of famous last year because he claimed to have the cure for COVID-19. And so I found many image problems in his papers, and I did a whole thread on that 3 days ago. And so these, when I post on PubPeer or on social media, those cases are seem to be responded a little bit better by the journal. So that's very much in line with what Paul Brookes found, that when you put sunshine on things, then there might be an action, and that is a little bit more satisfactory than all these 60% of papers that are not acted upon. And so, of course, this has personal ramifications, and so here's a screenshot of the tweets that I got in the past 3 days, actually during this conference, which were all tweeted by the same person. So these are not trolls tweeting at me. This is a person who is a professor at the institute where the famous professor works. So the tweets are by basically one of his employees, and the famous professor himself is not tweeting, but one of his staff members basically is tweeting nasty things about me. And that is, I know that's the price I pay. I'm not complaining about these things, but it just shows you that when you try to politely call out images that might be, might have a problem, that those, people will immediately go into counterattacking me and find anything that has happened in my past life. So I worked at uBiome, and that company is obviously in the news lately. But yeah, that all gets tossed back in my face. And so you really have to be very strong to able to handle this. And this is, if it's just a troll yelling at you, sure, but this is a person with, 20,000 followers almost. And some of his tweets get amazing amount of likes and almost no pushback. And so this is just, yeah, it's a little bit scary, but we'll see how far he will, do this. But yeah, he's tweeting under his own name with his affiliation back at me. So this is sort of what was happening while I was live tweeting. I got all of these tweets also to handle with. And what are the rewards for what I'm doing? I'm doing this work for free. The rewards are, I mean, this is an empty slide that sort of sums it up. I do feel that, it's frustrating, but I do feel I have a lot of energy. I'll keep on going, but the rewards are very little and the personal damage is big. And this is obviously not for anybody, but I do feel by pointing out errors under my full name, I have a little bit of advantage, or at least I hoped I would have had an advantage of being taken a little bit more seriously. But yeah, the awards are very little and the wish list still is very long. So I have a wish list here. Obviously, image and textual similarity tools are on top of my list because they would, even though I screen by eye, those tools would make it much easier for me to, much faster for me to screen more papers. And it would also be, I would be taken more seriously if I had some proof other than, just my eyeballs who see things. I don't do overlays, I just see them, but it's hard to convince another person unless you have some, computerized detection tool that will convince that other person that what I'm seeing is real. And I'm very, very concerned about paper mill and artificially generated images. I already see more and more of those images coming up in the more sophisticated paper mill papers. And I just look at them and I think they're not real, but how can I prove that? And I have no idea. And I have also no idea how to stop this because this seems like almost impossible to detect. Other things on my wish list, maybe a little bit outside of the scope of the conference, but I do feel this is the right audience to bring these things up, is that I would like a seat at the table with publishers, with funders, with research integrity officers at institutions. As I said during my presentation, too often do I feel that I toss things over the fence and I don't even hear them land on the ground because I don't even get an email back. And after popping my head over the fence and asking if it even landed or if it's, is being taken care of, I usually get like, yeah, we're still working on this and you'll hear more from us when, don't call us, we'll call you, but I never hear something back. And that has to change. I just feel that's unacceptable. If you wait 5-6 years and nothing happens, if I find these things in 5 minutes, they should not be taking 5 years to be retracted. I also would really love to have better COPE guidelines. So I made my own rule because, I have some experience. For example, if you have 2 overlapping images, so one set, that's okay. It could still be an honest error. I'll be willing to accept an author who tells that to me. But if you have 3 or more, I feel that should be a retraction. This is just me proposing this rule, feel free to disagree with me and think it should be 4 or 5 or 6. But I do feel there needs to be some cutoff, like if you make that many mistakes in a paper, then, that should be a retraction. Then you cannot longer blame it anymore on a, oops, I made a mistake. Then really you have to put some question marks with the rest of the data and the paper. So faster retractions and better rules is sort of also high on my wish list. I would love legal help. I mean, I'm being harassed by this guy, like I have no idea what to do. You can have 90,000 followers on Twitter, but there's not a single one who will, well, maybe 1 or 2 who will reply to these people. You're really alone in this. And it does, I would love to have some legal advice, some people who are willing or have experience with that and can tell me what to do. And, because I'll maybe do crazy things and get myself into trouble because I don't have that experience. And then of course there's the possibility that everybody's telling me you should get a finder's fee. If you have, you reported all these papers and they were funded with millions of NIH, millions of dollars of NIH money. Should a person who finds that all these things were maybe flawed, all these grants and all these papers were flawed, should a whistleblower get some finder's fee for that, like some percentage of the grant or something like that? And I've also been frustrated with that because most of the cases I'm finding are like 5, 6, 7 years old, and I'm waiting on them. So now by now they're maybe 10 or 11 years old. And then, or I will say, oh, but they're too old, we're not going to look into them. I'm like, well, but I still found them. These papers are still being cited. There's maybe even grants still being written based on previous research. And so I do think that these papers are still relevant and we should still care about them. And this is also what some publishers will say, that if it's 6 years or older, we're not going to look into that. And that seems to be a strange rule. I'm not quite sure where that cutoff comes from. And then finally, I'm not going to lie, like I would love to have a little bit more academic recognition. This is actually the first conference I'm being invited to, so I'm finally feeling like, oh, I'm a scientist again. I can talk about my work and I can share ideas I have. But too many times I'm still invited only as like the weird career talk, in the evening. And I do feel I'm a scientist and I have, done research, and I'm doing something very different probably than most scientists are doing, but I'm probably having some effect, hopefully, on how science is being published and how science is being executed in the future. And I do feel it would be just great if that was recognized in some way. I'm not quite sure how, but that would be just really great. And that's my last slide, so I'll stop sharing.
Okay, Boris, you want to say a few words and then we can get into some questions and discussion?
Well, I think, so we agreed that as I had a talk to say everything I wanted this morning, it's going to be redundant if I say anything now, actually. So let's just go straight to the questions. There will be a point that I want to make on the questions we're going to be asked, but I'll take my chance when that comes around.
So I guess like one of the things that appears, this discussion that's going on in the chat box between Karina and Dorothy Bishop regarding should we always retract just because it's been reported, just because it's manipulated, does it always warrant retraction? And we need to be careful not to retract things too quickly. What are your thoughts about that? I think Elisabeth talked a bit about it, where the bar is. Do any of the editors have thoughts regarding cases where things have been maybe retracted a little bit too quickly, or people have been a bit too hasty to jump to conclusions? And
so I can't say about if a paper is retracted too quickly or not, but my experience is that the journals are also waiting and waiting and waiting. So if we are reporting something to the Institute and they're conducting their investigation, we heard yesterday or 2 days ago that it can take a few years for this investigation to be finished. So then the journal is waiting for these few years to find out what they can do with these paper. And then the whistleblower is contacting us to say, okay, what's the status of our paper? And we also don't know what the status is of the paper because we haven't heard from the Institute for 2 years. So it's this chain reaction. And at some point, we would like to do something about it. But it's really slippery because we can't say we want to retract this knowing that this investigation is going on, because what if they find they have the original data? We have a case from a few years ago where we were able to, it looked like it was going to be a retraction, but there was an institutional investigation. They couldn't find the original source data that was in the paper, but they found the lab books that were from the same time with the same set of related experiments. And we were able to correct the paper instead of retracting it, and using this replicate data that was generated and signed off from the Institute that it was from the same time, from the same experimental set. And that saved the paper. So yes, we could retract too quickly.
Okay. So Karina here is sort of in the chat is clarifying what she said. I mean, I guess her question really is, how do we prove on the basis of the data available to us that something has been manipulated? Making that call, saying these figures are too similar to be coincidentally individual is one thing, but calling it fraud, making that jump to actually assigning intent, that's the really difficult part, really, and that's the bit that really requires human input, right? You can't get a machine to say this is fraud, because unless you're in the room when it happened, then that becomes very difficult.
Can I just, this is Dorothy Bishop.
Yeah, Dorothy wants to say something. Yeah.
Well, all I want to say is, I mean, it's pervaded all 3 days. Everybody seems to think you only retract things if you can find that it's fraud. My point is that you retract things when they're wrong, because what matters are the readers. And if it's wrong, it's out there, it's getting into the scientific domain, it's being acted on, patients may be treated on that basis. I don't really care about waiting for these investigations into fraud. I care about having wrong things taken out of the scientific record.
Yeah. I think that's I've had a number of cases where, where I've shown issues with maybe in 20 or 30 papers from a single individual, and maybe 10 or 15 of those have been corrected. And it's like, yeah, all of these are accidental errors, but, I'm sorry, if you're making accidental errors in 20 or 30 of your papers, you're a crappy scientist, right? That's still bad science. That's still polluted scientific record.
Sorry, can I just say what I meant? This is Corinna.
Oh.
I think that like reporting an issue and having proofs that there is an issue is not the same thing. That's all I'm saying. Like, you're not the fact that one of you or anyone looks at an image and says these two images are the same without proofs, it's not science. Like, we really, like, it's basically what I was trying to say when I was discussing it during my talk. We need to be scientists as much as if we have proof that there is a major error, of course we should retract. If we have proofs that there has been a major manipulation and things, or a manipulation in my personal opinion, so that whatever is reported in the article is not any longer okay, then of course we should retract it. But we need proof. Like, the fact that one person sees one thing doesn't mean that that person has the proof that there's a problem. And anyone that has worked in the field or is working in the field has examples where things were reported and then they were not true. That's what I'm saying. Sorry.
Thank you. To that, I would say that we don't follow up on everything because when we are alerted to, so for example, receiving PubPeer notifications, we look at each of the comments and assess it. And some of the comments we don't agree that they are worth following up on. And when we are checking the images in Photoshop, they're not just seen by one person. It's a team of 3 or 4 people within the editorial team, all looking at the same data to see if we all agree. And if we don't all agree, then we have to see where we go. But it's not just one person deciding that they're going to they're saying that this is identical. It's a team of people that have to agree together.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the same way that we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket with a single algorithm that is going to start tagging and labeling images, we don't want to make a single person the judge, jury, and executioner, right? That's a dangerous precedent. Can I ask a question to you? So I wanted to bring up something, and I think it's a person who hasn't been mentioned at this meeting yet. This is her, Helene Hill. Many of you may be familiar with this book. She actually was the pioneer in this sort of whistleblowing field. She started uncovering issues of data manipulation in the 1990s. She used terminal digit analysis. She was working in a lab, and if data is real, the last number is random or randomly distributed. And she found that when people type data in, you might accidentally hit the number 3 more often. And so she actually did something. She wrote about it in a book. She brought a lawsuit using this law in the US, which is called quitam or quitam, depending on how your Latin is pronounced. And she tried, this is a principle in federal law where, whistleblowers can bring a lawsuit on behalf of the government, and any funds that are recovered, the whistleblower gets part of the profits. She actually failed in her quitam lawsuit, spent a lot of her money over 20 years on lawyers. But just can each of you, or one or two of you, talk about legal issues, because we've heard a lot of things about lawyers getting involved over the past few days. And what are your thoughts about the role of the law in dealing with these types of issues?
You'd better nominate a volunteer, Paul.
Okay, how about you, Boris? PubPeer has had 1 or 2 lawsuits, right?
Well, so yes and no. So we haven't been sued directly, as I said in my talk, but we were involved in a very high-profile case where we were extremely lucky to be helped by the ACLU. So they commenters, anonymous commenters, were sued, and we were subpoenaed to try and get identifying information. And we were very grateful to have the defense pro bono from the ACLU. They did a fantastic job and completely won the case at appeal in at the state level. So I think on the whole, you'd want the law to stay out of it. I mean, there are going to be some horribly complicated cases if the law has to try and understand the science. So I think law is we want to keep it out, and generally it's used as a tool for chilling criticism, correction, as far as I can see. Legal threats. So we certainly see legal threats at PubPeer, and that's one of the main reasons that we offer anonymity, is to give people protection from, if only the hassle. But to be honest, what grad student can afford even an hour of a lawyer's time, right? And even if you've got a great case, if you can't afford to defend it, you lose. And I'll just recount one anecdote. Somebody left a signed comment on PubPeer saying these authors have plagiarized my paper and, proof in hand, and was promptly threatened with legal action and asked us to take the comment down because he couldn't defend the case, although it was, a slam dunk issue. So law is a weapon in the hands of the powerful and the desperate, I would say, in this situation. And you know that very well, Paul. Lawyers cost a lot of money, and even if you've got a good case, there's never zero risk. That's the problem. You could lose, you could end up, on the hook for a lot of money. So, I mean, I would honestly advise people often to comment anonymously, just to avoid the hassle. You just don't need it, really. The information is out there, and you'll have helped people, and then you can carry on with your life.
Yeah, that's a strong argument in favor of anonymity. For Jana and Erica, I mean, we hear tales sometimes about authors, lawyering up and suing a journal when they're accused of things. Have either of you encountered any of those types of things?
I haven't, thank God. I'm terrified of that. I mean, yeah, I think I can imagine, and I have thought about this a lot, that it could get really nasty, especially with retractions. I mean, you know, the main part of my work is obviously the pre-publication thing, and you don't really, I mean, what I get a lot is authors actually just disappearing, not pursuing the issue. And the exact opposite of that would obviously be, you know, being threatened with lawyers, which hasn't happened to me in my 10 years of doing this. So
from my side, we have not directly had, like, we've not had a lawsuit. I checked with Bernd earlier, and he said that was one in the last 10 years that we had a lawsuit brought against us from somewhere in the US. But more recently, we had a paper which we were trying to retract, and it was escalated to the dean of the institute. And once it got escalated this far, then the institutional leader started threatening us with legal action. So it was a very unconventional correction instead of a retraction, because we were being threatened with legal issues.
Yeah, that's kind of worrying. And I note in the comments here, Richard Van Noorden, he talks about Nature being sued for their journalism on these issues as well. One other sort of quick question for those of you in the editorial side of things. What kind of fraction, what kind of percentage of the cases that you're finding are coming from individuals such as Elisabeth or myself, or, you know, what's the makeup of you finding these things? Are you getting a significant number coming from outside reports, or is it coming from post hoc screening? Are you know, what's coming from PubPeer? What role do whistleblowers play in your overall workload, I guess?
So for me personally, I would say 90% of the image-related issues are flagged by PubPeer. We've only had a handful of named whistleblowers contact the journal directly in the last couple of years, and there are also, we've had a few cases where the authors came to us saying that there were problems with their papers. So it's kind of a mix, but I would say the most are anonymous comments from PubPeer.
yeah, so it's the same for us. I mean, I'm really, the PubPeer comments that I get are mostly quite old, which is nice because it means that most of the things that I checked before publication were actually haven't been picked up. But there are, of course, you know, every now and then there is something. I have had authors contact us wanting to correct things that just didn't really make much sense, and then when you look into the figures more deeply, you realize that actually there's something else really wrong. And then, you know, the authors have got themselves into trouble basically, and there's one case where we might have to actually retract it now. Yeah, there's few readers that contact us directly. It's like Erica says, mostly it's PubPeer, and you know, Elisabeth's been flagging a few things to us, but they're also on PubPeer, and she's contacted us directly as well.
One thing I've found a couple of times, you know, is say review a paper, find fraudulent data, report it to the journal. Obviously, it doesn't get published. I'll see that paper in press 2 years later at a different journal. This stuff just finds a way of getting into the literature. What efforts do you think are there? I mean, Elisabeth, are you following, you know, we've seen from Retraction Watch examples of papers that have been retracted and then published elsewhere, right? What are we doing at the journal level and at the whistleblower level to sort of keep track of things where they're being dealt with at the pre or the post publication level, but then they just have a nasty habit of coming back to bite us?
Yes.
I see a lot of repeat offenders, like, you know, not necessarily the same paper being republished. I cannot think of any example of that I've dealt with personally, but there's definitely a couple of people who post the weirdest things, and those papers usually are not retracted, or maybe one or two are retracted, but the rest, they keep on publishing these strange ideas in, you know, journals that are sort of under the radar. Maybe they're indexed in PubMed. They're maybe, you know, in between predatory and legit. You cannot really place them. But yeah, there's a couple of strange authors, and it actually seems that those papers, often from people with fake affiliations and fake IRB approvals, because they made up their own institution and gave themselves permission to do the research and then come up with completely fake data. You know, there's like sets of 20 or 30 papers by these authors, and no journal is touching them. And that is my personal frustration, but not directly like a republishing of the same journal in a different, the same paper in a different journal.
I could just say, if we have a referee bring concerns about fraudulent data in the paper to us, this would immediately trigger that we stop the peer review process. We alert the referees that there is potential that there's problems with the data, and we would do the screening. So let's say this paper was before it was invited for revision, then we would do the screening checks, and we would, depending on what we found, contact the institution and alert them already that there are issues. And for these papers, we check PubMed every 6 months or every year to see if they've popped up somewhere else. And if they do, then we would alert the other journal. But this is not super frequent for us.
Yeah,
We've
so
also
I've done, oh, sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to
it's fine, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I have, I do this reject analysis, and I have alerted journals that publish stuff that we rejected. And the response is not very good. I mean, normally they are, you know, lower down impact factor journals that maybe don't, you know, spend the right amount of care. And it's been really frustrating that you know, I've even had responses saying, oh, thank you very much for alerting us, we're going to look into this, and even someone saying we will retract this, and then didn't. It's really, I don't have enough time to do this on a regular basis and to contact every single, you know, to really, when I know about it, I will contact the other journal, but I can't do it. I can't do the reject analysis as often as I want to. But it's a huge problem, because it just means that whatever I'm finding and whatever I'm preventing from being published is just going to go somewhere else. And sometimes it doesn't take very long because they've submitted somewhere else at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I reviewed a paper for a journal one time. It had bad data. I rejected it. It showed up 6 months later with the bad data removed. No, with the bad data. So it showed up 6 months later with the bad, so that at least they'd edited it. But the key thing in this case was the author list was identical. So I kind of raised the question here, you know, okay, if you've got somebody in your lab that's faking data and that gets found, wouldn't you want to fire that person and get him out of your lab as a PI? Well, yes. The paper got published without the fake data, with all of the same authors. And so in that case, the only conclusion is that the PI of the lab was the one faking the data, because he's the only one that can't be fired. Right. So there's some very odd types of happenings there. There's a question here in the chat box from Rafael. You know, what standing would an author even have if they publish in a journal where they transfer copyright? Can they sue if the journal wants to retract? Would they have any legal standing? My guess there is, as was said in the topic box, it seems like it would be mainly they'd be suing on the basis of defamation, depending on how nasty the retraction notice is. I guess can you guys talk a little bit about wording of retraction notices and being careful and not using inflammatory language in such notices?
Yeah, so retraction notices are, we're trying to, so there are a number of things. One, we have to make them neutral because we are trying to avoid these types of situations. Two, we want to make them as transparent as possible so that the person reading it understands what happened and why whichever data was retracted. And we always run the retraction notices past the authors and give them the opportunity to agree or disagree with the contents. And then we list this in the retraction note that authors X, Y, Z agree with this retraction and authors A and B disagree. So it's kind of protecting us this way. It's not, I can't say about the copyright, but we are careful and check everything with the authors as well, and sometimes with their institutes to see that we're as careful and safe as we can be.
Yeah, so I mean, there's COPE guidelines. You have to contact the institute, of course, and so we do exactly what you've just described, Erica. That you try to be as transparent as possible, and we do really try to get the authors to agree. You know, when you're retracting a paper that looks like it has massive problems, then normally for an author to then also, I mean, if it's such a clear-cut case, then it's better for the authors, I guess, to agree rather than to disagree with it. And I mean, it's not as if you're going to say which one of the authors, you know, like you said, you have to be very neutral. You're not going to say which one of the authors did the modeling of the figures or whatever the problem is.